Hey, it's Rick. Welcome to the channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how I painted this Bugs Bunny and Tasmanian Devil animation cell. I start with a piece of masonite for the background. I coat that with Liquitex gray gesso and a mix of water and a flow release. The flow release is just to reduce brush strokes. I give it alternating coats of gesso until I've built it up to an opacity I like. I had traced this image onto a piece of tracing paper, and now I'm transferring it down to the board. I mask off the edges with painter's tape to protect the margins. Now I'm going to cover the entire background with a sheet of frisket. This is just clear masking film used for airbrushing. This background is going to be predominantly airbrush. I've got to cut out all the shapes so that I can peel the frisket like a stencil. Essentially, you're doing your own vinyl cutting and then weeding and then putting it back to reveal and hide certain areas when you airbrush. I use these little dollar store salad dressing cups with lids for mixing my paint in. It's pretty good if you need a large quantity of paint. You can save them from one day to the next, and they won't dry out on you while you're using them. I'm using Liquitex acrylic gouache for this. After I complete each section and before I move on to the next, I coat it with a little bit of clear acrylic varnish, just to make sure that the frisket doesn't peel up any of the paint that I put it back down on top of. Now that the background is completely finished, it's time to line up the glass and figure out where the actual cell characters are going to sit. This one needs to be aligned pretty good because the belt from the Tasmanian devil needs to go directly into that machine in the background. So I've created a little cutout here. When I stick this down to the board, it'll be registered when I flip it around and trace it. Now I'm just going to clean the glass really well. So this printout is reversed because you're doing all the work on the back of a sheet of glass. I'm using a technical pen here, a 0.45 millimeter, with some acetate ink. I find it's the only thing that actually sticks to the glass without beading. It also doesn't interact with the paints that I'm going to be using later. You get a little bit of parallax when you're working on this. You're obviously working through the thickness of the glass, so the image on top that you're creating only lines up for you at one angle with the image underneath you're tracing off of. You've got to keep that in mind as you're moving things around. It's important that you clean this side of the glass really well before you start. If you don't, you're not really going to get to go back and clean it later. You can't come close to the edges of any of this with any sort of cleaners or towels or anything, or you might wreck it. I'm also, I've got a piece of black Bristol board here under my hand just to separate the two so I don't leave any palm prints or anything on the glass. And now on to the painting. I'm using Tester's model enamel here. It's important that you don't use matte enamel or metallic enamel or any sort of weird finishes. This is just a plain glossy model enamel. I'm letting this dry in between colors, so it is taking a fairly long time. I spent probably a full day on this, just going back and forth, doing one color, then putting a small fan on to dry it as quickly as possible, and then moving on to the next. If you try doing the colors while they're wet and they're right next to each other, and one of them touches the other, they'll sort of bleed in to each other, and you'll have to start again. I had a bit of a problem with this yellow paint here. After I mixed it, it was really, really bubbly. And you can see in the final, after it's dried, it still has these little bubbles that dried right into it. It's not so bad from the front. When I put a second coat on, it's not really noticeable from a distance, so I just left it. I wasn't going to go back and scrape the entire thing off and do it all again. You can see here from the outside, it's not that bad. There's not too many mistakes visible. There's a few spots where I spilt some paint. I'm going to have to scrape that off. This is my light box, so when I put the piece on this and turn the light on, you'll be able to see it really magnifies all the mistakes and stuff you couldn't see before. Now you can see how there's all sorts of missing bits, and in some spots the paint's not really thick enough. So using the light box, I'm going to flip this over now, go back and recode everything a second time, and correct all those mistakes. So when it comes to assembling the final piece, this is sort of the order. First is the frame, then it's the outside glass, then the matting, then the cell glass, then the foam core spacer, and then the background. Here I'm using rubber cement to apply a coat to the margins of the background, and then I'm going to apply this black foam core. This is going to provide the spacer, the depth between the background and the cell, so there's a little bit of a cast shadow there. If you wanted that to be more pronounced, you could use multiple layers of foam core. For me, I find one looks good, but it's personal preference. Once that's done, it can be inserted into the frame with the rest. I'm going to use these little cleats here and hammer them in with a screwdriver. Probably not the best tool or the best way to do this job, but it's what I'm using. And that's it. The whole thing's finished. Just a matter of taking some glamour shots. So if you've enjoyed the video, or learned something, or were inspired to make your own animation cell, click that like and subscribe button. Thanks for watching.